Thanks for tuning in to Becoming Something, where we promise to keep the conversation honest and real for young adults in their 20s and 30s. Every moment we live is training for a future moment, and that's why we do this podcast, because we want you to be prepared for everything that life is going to throw at you. Our hope with this podcast is that it would help you become all that God desires you to be. So with that in mind, let's jump right in to this week's episode of Becoming Something.
What's up, podcast world? It's your boy JP in the podcast studio. Listen, Elon's gonna cue.
Oh my God.
What are you doing?
You're not protecting your heart very well. I'm coming right at your chest.
Why are you doing that?
Nate, he has not even introduced
I'm coming right at
himself
you, man.
or the.
You got-
What is going on, guys? Honestly, the fact that that's the first time you put him in a chokehold is
In the
really
world.
a miracle.
I could have taken you. I just
Hey.
wasn't trying.
That is pastoral abuse.
No,
that we just
pastoral
captured
abuse
on
happens when the
camera.
pastor abuses.
No.
You are also a pastor.
What you just did is assault, and it's on camera.
Also, you
Oh,
kind of.
we record this?
And why are you doing
kinda
that?
looked
Ain't
like
it
a-
stupid? On top of everything else,
I was trying to transition.
you've provoked
didn't
me.
even
I was
say
trying to
hi yet.
transition.
Too soon. Let's get him off the podcast. Start a
So today,
petition.
we have brought you together to say that this is Nate's last podcast. We'll be doing a national search for replacements.
I really think we can find just anyone who would
You have to be a
Great
Christian. Be a step.
have a
If
pulse.
you had to be a Christian,
yeah, I don't-
you wouldn't.
Do you want to do the whole "What's Up" podcast world?
Yeah,
Thing.
man, you've ruined it. What's up, podcast world? It is your boy JP here in the podcast studio with Kathy Davidson.
I have just no words. I'm just-
Were you doing
Do you
football
think
drills?
listeners could tell what
was
just happened?
that?
If you're listening and not watching, Nate just attacked JP out of nowhere.
He wasn't
With kind
guarding
of
his
like-
heart, bro.
Floofy, woofy.
Woofy.
You just kind of did this.
No, you did like
He's gonna have a bruise. He's gonna have a
And you're,
bruise.
Like
you're
a
bragging
bruised-
about that on a
like a bruised
podcast
reed.
that people are listening to.
A cord of three strands is
so.
not easily
This
broken,
is
right?
the worst
That was
intro
the worst.
in the history
should
of
we
every
I think
podcast
we
we've
should
ever done.
Restart.
No, it's not authentic.
Dadgummit.
I don't. I want to do. We do all of ours
Could
unedited.
Nate get canceled?
So you're going
for
to
this?
Cabo, huh?
What are you doing?
I want to go to Cabo with you.
No, you cannot go. You will not ever go to Cabo
You just
with me.
attacked him, and
You're
then you want to go to Cabo.
Embarrassing.
That's not how friendship
Like right now,
works.
you can't stop laughing, and no one knows why.
Well, I think I lost air to my head when you put me in a chokehold.
I put you in a chokehold as an act of self-defense. As I'm trying, my brain is trying to calculate what is happening to me. I go into survival mode. Listen, I'm a trained Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu
How'd you know how to do
artist.
that? Honestly,
Oh, you wouldn't believe the things I know.
I was asking him. You pushed him like my 4-year-old pushes his brother.
We know where you learned that from SpongeBob SquarePants. We get it.
Speaking of what you let into your mind,
We understand.
Your heart.
We understand where you learned your your self-defense.
So, guys, I clearly don't know where we're going today on this podcast. All I saw on our notes was "guard your heart," and I don't know
you
what
thought
you
it meant
guys
like
want to
your
talk about.
physical heart
Yeah, I
that's
was
in
like,
your
if,
chest.
yeah, if you get hurt.
So you thought we were trying to like teaching self-defense.
Yes, I thought this was self-defense.
Man,
So, what do you mean? Is this like metaphorical hurt or what?
I feel like the guard your heart that's like the instruction to every 15-year-old girl at
Yes.
the lock-in. It's
Yes.
like, guard your heart. And I feel like the person saying it is just as confused as the 15-year-old young woman.
Yeah,
that's
they're
like,
not guarding their heart, but they
Yeah,
know
they're
it's
like-
the thing to say.
Well, they don't even know what it means, right?
Do guys get told to guard your heart in dating relationships? Like it's like go-to number one advice.
If you're like
Maybe-
head
you,
over
you have
heels,
a crush on a boy, they're like, "Well, guard your
I know
heart."
I know it's gonna surprise you, but Nate actually wasn't a big dater. He wasn't.
No
he
one ever
wasn't-
gave him advice. He
wasn't
didn't
huge.
use it.
He wasn't huge on the dating scene. Did the church tell your friends to guard their heart?
Did they ever tell you that?
I mean, like if a guy's like, you just met her and is like, she's the one, I'm all in, gonna marry her, and it's
Does
like,
that
hey,
happen?
bro, guard your heart. Yeah,
Guard your heart, bro.
yeah.
Huh.
It might not work. Is that what it means? Where does guard your heart even come from?
So Proverbs 4:23 says, above all else, guard your heart, for it's the wellspring of life. Your version might say, with all diligence, keep your heart with all diligence, for everything you do flows from it. So there's kind of a couple versions there. So it's just like when it says keep, it's like keep it from going bad. Like the milk, will the milk keep, or is something going to be preserved, kept from rotting, kept from spoiling? So protect your heart, because the things in your life flow from your heart. And so it's not talking about the physical organ, but our emotional quotient. And so if our thoughts are kept in our minds, then our emotions are stored in our heart. Again, not the organ, but like your gut. Your heart is what you perceive that you should do, a sense of how to act, how to respond. That's your heart. And so he's saying, hey, protect your heart, because everything in your life is going to come out of what you feed your heart. And so the guarding it is really like in like its simplest form, it's like be careful what you let in.
Interesting.
Like be careful so think of your heart as a storage container.
Okay.
Or a place that stores information, like a computer. And so it's be careful what you let on that hard drive. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but so like just about like dating relationships.
No. In fact, the person Solomon scribing, so the first 10 chapters of Proverbs are lectures. I think it's the first 9 chapters actually are lectures. And so the person that is Solomon, who's writing Proverbs 4, is not even really thinking about relationships, but I think for single friends, it's a very appropriate scripture, because this is where we don't guard our hearts.
So it applies to that area, but it like applies to everyone.
Yeah, and I think particularly with women, and I know that sometimes gender stereotypes aren't helpful, but I do think that a challenge there is what I've seen a lot is young women are grieving a relationship that never even happened.
Yep.
So they're like mourning the loss of a guy or a breakup that was never even a dating relationship, because they progressed beyond what reality was.
Yep.
They were picking out wedding dresses, and he thought they were just having coffee. And that can happen. It certainly can happen with men too, for sure. But I think more often it happens among women.
I was talking to a girl the other day who was saying that exact thing.
Yeah.
Like hadn't even gone on an official date.
Your Pinterest board and all that with the wedding dress and the cakes and the
already tried
whatnot.
out your last name with theirs, or your first name with their last name.
And so I think guarding your heart means protecting your heart from what you feed it, because it flows, it takes you places. So think about it like this. We all have 5 senses. We learned this in health class, like 8th grade
Nate,
health
can you
class.
say them
You know what they
for
are?
us?
Yes. Touch, smell, sight, hearing, and tasting.
Taste. Good
Great
job,
job.
mate. Way to go, buddy. The air's coming back
Hey,
to your brain.
I lost that sense with COVID.
Okay. All right. So we have 5 senses in which we experience life with. So we kind of take in our surroundings through our 5 senses. So our 5 senses feed our mind. Our mind is where we hold thoughts. If our mind is a container, it's what we think, it goes there. Where our thoughts feed our heart. Our heart is our emotional quotient. That's how we feel. So this is what we think. This is how we feel. And the way that we feel determines what comes out of our life. If you feel bad, if your outlook is bad, Jesus talks about this in Matthew 6. Like if the eye is dark, then the whole body is dark, because it's the way that you take in the world. Meaning, if you woke up this morning and you're in depression, you feel like there's kind of a dark cloud over everything, then you're not going to go and end up in a great place today, at least. I'm not trying to be hopeless, but you're going to want to do something to give you a more positive outlook, so that what flows out of your life is positive. If your outlook is negative, then often what flows out of your life is negative. And so now the way that this works practically is, if I'm watching Shark Tank, right? I love Shark Tank. It's probably my favorite show on TV. Then all of a sudden I start thinking like, man, what can I invent? You know, what can I come up with? Or I bet I could run a company. I used to watch UFC all the time, Ultimate Fighting Championship.
That's where that came from.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Like you guys got to watch just a minute ago. And so as you're watching that, there's like a violence that stirs in my heart, right? And
Totally.
and it's like, all right, I just started thinking like, okay, man, hey, you want to wrestle? Let's go, you know? And it's just like that's kind of stirred up in
It's
you.
the same when I watch like too many rom-coms
Yeah.
or shows that are all about this
You
like
wanna start to
couple
wrestle?
falling in love. Yeah, I get really into
You get violent?
No, I will just say, like, even as a married person, if I watch too much, it's like you just start thinking, how's the couple going to get together? What's going to happen? Oh, that's so sweet. That's so romantic. Oh, and then you could turn into like, Matt hasn't done that in a while, or
Yeah.
man, that's missing from my life.
Yeah.
And I'm a happily married person. It grows though, and you have to think about, man, what have I been watching lately?
Or like the way social media works.
Yeah.
Like I would say your heart works like TikTok. Your heart works like the Instagram algorithms. If you watch, like what happens for me, if I go on the Explore page, which is really bad news, and I would stay off the Explore page.
Yeah.
But if I go on there and I'm scrolling and I slow down over somebody getting punched, which I often do, in true confession, meaning when I'm on the Explore page, which is not often, but if I'm there and I'm scrolling, I go slow over some fight scene or some like UFC clip. It knows that I slowed down
then
there,
puts
and
more in.
it says, "Hey, watch this one, watch this one, watch this one, watch this one," and it gives me more of what I consumed. Well, that's what your heart does. So when you obsess about those rom-coms, or you start binge watching, that Netflix series, your heart goes, "Oh, you like that? Well, watch this, watch this, watch this. Hey, look over here, check her out, check him out. Why don't you have a relationship like that?" And it begins to feed the discontentment in you, which can take you, everything you do flows from it. That can take you to, a bad place in life. And so what the scripture says is, above all else, guard your heart. So more than you guard your money in a bank account that's FDIC insured, more than you guard your stereo or car with a security system, more than you guard your apartment or house with a security system, more than you guard your valuables that you put in a safe, more than you guard your social security card, more than you guard your purse, your wallet, more than you protect anything, protect your heart. Be careful what you let in, because it takes you places.
But I feel like I can be unaffected by things. Like I can listen to podcasts with cussing and not cuss. I can watch horror films and like be unaffected by that. Like
Yeah. You really can't. And that's what the proverb is saying. Is that's a naive perspective. Is you can't. You may be able to watch someone cuss and not cuss. Yet,
Yeah.
like that's gonna take you somewhere. That's what he's saying. He says the input is going to cause an output. And it's like the Idaho murders, right? That people got obsessed with, this person who committed these crimes, and then you begin to peel back the layers, and he was obsessed with other people committing crimes. And you see that all the time on shows like Snapped and Forensic Files and True Crime and whatever, a CSI. And you begin to feed your heart that way, and then your whole thinking turns dark, and you don't like, in ways you don't want to confess. You're like, man, this person upset me. I thought about just stabbing them in the throat, and you're like, whoa,
Yeah, where'd
man,
that come
that
from?
escalated really quick. You're like, oh yeah, something's wrong with me. What's wrong with me, man? I road rage the other day. It's like, where did that come from? It's like, well, what are you feeding your heart? Young women will come up to me, and they'll say, "Hey, I only date losers." This has happened so many times. I only date losers, and it's like, well, what are you listening to? And they're like, "What do you mean? Like, who am I dating?" No. What are you listening to? So I'm talking about my dating relationship. I know. You only date losers. I heard you. What's on your Spotify playlist? What's your Apple Music? What are you listening to? And they're like, "Oh, that new Miley Cyrus jam. I can buy myself flowers." It's like, cool. Miley Cyrus was married to a guy who cheated on her with 14 different women, right?
Really?
Yeah, true story.
wow.
And so it's like that's where those inputs lead to.
Yeah.
Be careful what you feed your heart. And I know it sounds like
Sounds very legalistic.
it sounds like your
honestly.
grandmother's advice.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, garbage in, garbage out. See, as it turns out, grandma
true.
was repeating the wisdom of the wisest person who has ever lived, who, by the way, didn't take his own advice at the end of his life. And it says in 1 Kings, I think it's chapter 11, that he dated women who turned his heart away from God, and he began to build altars to foreign gods, and he ended his life in deep, dark depression, like deeply. The man with everything, who had more money than anyone who has ever lived, died deeply depressed because he didn't guard his heart.
But if I don't listen to that music, if I don't watch the shows that other people are watching, I will feel like a loser.
Yeah.
And I mean,
because you won't know what everyone else is talking
just
about.
The Chosen.
You'll
Like,
actually,
Honestly,
as you
yes.
feed your heart things that are positive, you'll actually feel not like a loser. You'll feel like an optimist. You'll feel like somebody with a positive outlook. And I don't want to be too trite and simple here, because the brain and the heart can be complex, but they are connected. And in fact, even in our body, as we talk about the organs, there is a nerve that connects the two. And you know, our outlook is connected with two, with both of them. And so I think, what was I going to say? You know, I feel like a loser. I was going to say something to what you just said.
You said you start to feel like an optimist as you fill your mind
You
with.
feel good, actually.
Well, I'll just say, as we look at that scripture, Proverbs 4:23, if you look at it in context, he says, "Hey, turn your ear to me, son." And he says, what I'm about to share with you, you know, I want you to let this in, right? And so I would say, what are you listening to? He says, keep perverse speech far from your lips. What are you saying? What comes out of your mouth? He says, turn your eyes directly to the path. Like, where do you look? What do you see? Like, these are ways to guard your heart. Be careful what you look at. Be careful what you listen to. Be careful what you say. He says, do not let your feet, keep your feet on the path. Don't let it stray from the path. Be careful where you go and who you hang out with. I mean, I've been helping people with some really simple advice for over a decade, and it's simply change your playmates in your playground. If you keep bumping into the same things, it's like, who are you hanging out with and where are you hanging out? You change those two things and you'll stop bumping into that sin, that problem. You know, change your playmates in your playground. And then I would just say, where do you stray? Like, what if the enemy's going to take you out, how would he do it? Hey, can I say something right here?
Yeah.
We hadn't talked about this, but I actually worked with some web developers that, this is true, I know y'all think it's a joke, that put together a test to determine how somebody would be taken out.
Really?
Yeah, like how the enemy might take you out.
Okay.
Yeah, true story. And it's like, it's fascinating, like to think through, if I know what Satan's going to do, if I know how he's going to attack my heart, then, you know.
Dang.
Wait. What do you
I know, it's so random. I just like, it's a true
Did
story.
you install that onto our computers at work?
No, but it's at whydoido.com, which is like, I hesitate to say that, but it really is.
Awesome.
It's there, whydoido.com.
That would be helpful
You
to
can
know.
go and you can take
know
it.
your
Helpful.
ditch so you can put up some guardrails.
Yeah,
Man.
so random.
One thing that is stirring in my mind is it's not just important to remove the bad things from our lives, right? Like the bad shows we watch, the bad things we listen to, the bad things we read, but it's really just as important to replace that with things that make you love God more. It's
That's
like
exactly
when you're
right.
wanting to quit smoking cigarettes, right? Like you have this addiction. You can't just say, oh, I'm just never going to smoke again. You have to replace that action with something that's positive and going to help you. So I think if it's the same in this, it's like, yes, momentarily you might feel like a loser for not watching the show that everyone's talking about. And then if you replace it with something that makes you love God more, you won't care. You'll be the happiest loser there ever was because you're going to be filled up from spending time with God.
Yeah. So you're saying, like, let's say I struggle with the sin of comparison.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like what I'm supposed to do is just like, hey, stop comparing, right? Like that's how I get out of it.
You got to, I mean, it's funny, the theme, you got to jujitsu that, right? And so it's exactly what Kathy said. It's like, if I'm struggling with comparison, I need to say, all right, who should I compare myself to? How about Jesus? He was perfect. All right, I'll never be perfect. Then I need a savior. And we can kind of think about that and then say, okay, I'm comparing myself to this person, but the whole comparison is worldly. So I have to replace that vice with a virtue, which is something I've been thinking a lot about lately because of a project I've been working on. And so it's like, hey, what does it look like for me to not just try to not do this sin, not just defense, but what does it look like for me to go on offense? And you've heard probably in teams and coaching, the best defense is a good offense.
Yeah.
And so I think so often in Christianity, we think, hey, how do I protect my heart? And I'm saying rather than focusing on all of the don'ts, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, what if we focus on the do, go, see, be with, be, right? And so we think, well, these friends are bad influences. And so I'm just going to sit at home alone. No. Hang out with the good influences and go on offense, beginning to advance the gospel and build the kingdom and live a virtuous life, not just a life full of vices and not a impotent life, but a powerful life of change, of pursuing the things of Christ. And so we replace the bad. So it's not just that I protect my heart from these bad things, but I actually feed my heart what is healthy. It's if we were to talk about like a diet, it's not that I just stop eating junk food, but I actually start eating what's healthy for me, and then I feel good. And that's the promise of the Scripture is a more positive outlook of life, that you begin to do what is good and you feel good, and then you continue to be good and to be happy and to, joyful and those kinds of things.
Yeah. One thing that helps me is just paying attention to when I don't feel good.
Yeah.
Like when I have a thought that just comes out of nowhere, it seems like, or I have this insecurity pop up all of a sudden, or, just a bad feeling about myself. It's to think, hey, did I just read something that stirred this? Did I just see something? Yeah. And oftentimes it is. It's like, oh, I was just on Instagram and I saw a picture of these moms and their kids having a play date and I wasn't invited, and it provokes insecurity and jealousy. And it's like, okay, like instead of just letting those feelings go or letting them build on each other, it's like, hey, if something's off, take a second. Yeah. God, why is this there? Where's it coming from? Analyze it so that you can get to the root of the sin that's going on there.
That's exactly the Proverbs 4:23. It's like, protect your heart.
Yeah.
Because if you let bad comparison, envy into your heart, then you get out of your life that. So it's like the goal is not for me just to not envy. It's like comparison is what you brought up, just to not compare. But when I compare, I envy. So rather than envy, I'm going to encourage and be a cheerleader for those friends and say, hey, way to go. Right. And I'm going to feed those thoughts and say those things. That's what the proverb says. What you see and what you say, I'm going to say encouraging things. And now all of a sudden I have a more encouraging outlook.
Totally.
I mean, you've been in ministry for a long time. Have you noticed that people are getting more anxious, like more depressed? Has that been a trend? Like, can we do anything about that? Or?
Yeah, I feel like we're all like, suicide is high, depression is high, people are more anxious, and everybody's like, I don't know why, and it's like, oh, it's because of our phones and social media. And like, oh yeah, it's because of our phones and social media. But I don't want to give up my phone, so I'd just rather be depressed and anxious than give up my phone.
Dang.
And it's crazy. It's like we're seeing it at the highest levels that have ever been. But it's like, I don't want to replace this with anything else, or I don't want to give up social media. And I'm saying, man, you have to. Like, you have to do whatever you can to cut out of your life that which is harming your relationship with Jesus, that which is hurting your discipleship, your walk with Christ.
I hear you. And I agree with you. And I also think there's a listener who's thinking, this sounds really legalistic. I can love God. I can spend a lot of time with God, and then I can just watch this one show, and it's going to be fine. It's going to even out in the wash.
Tozer said that the church will be at the height of its heresy when we call obedience legalism.
Dang.
And so we cannot call obedience legalism. Legalism is not obedience. For us to do what is necessary, for us to pursue holiness, like, that's not legalism. That's obedience. And so you might say, man, it is so legalistic for me to not watch this show and not listen to that song. And I'm saying you not watching that show and you not listening to that song is going to bring a greater joy and greater happiness to your life. And you watch violence, you're going to be prone to violence. You listen to profanity, you're going to be prone to be more profane. You listen to or watch things that are erotic and sexual, you're going to be more sexual and erotic and inclined to those kinds of things and thinking about those kinds of things, because your heart is going to continue to give you more of what you've seen and heard and listened to. And so as you cut those things out, it's like you have a choice. Right? It's your choice. You can say, no, I really want to listen to that song. And I'm going to say, great, you're going to be more inclined to sin. That's the trade you're making. And I'm saying it's a bad trade. In fact, the Proverbs, the wisest man who's ever lived, is saying it's a bad trade.
I mean, I think that's such helpful language. Just thinking about a trade, like anytime I listen to something, I have to know what's going to happen to me.
What is going to cost you?
If I watch this show, what's going to happen within me? You have to analyze it before you do it.
Yeah. Is it even worth it? Jesus came that we would have abundant life.
Yeah.
Life to the full.
Yeah.
So above all else, guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life. Everything you do flows from it. See you guys
this is
next week.
helpful. Do it. Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to Becoming Something, where we promise to keep the conversation honest and real for young adults in their 20s and 30s. Every moment we live is training for a future moment, and that's why we do this podcast, because we want you to be prepared for everything that life is going to throw at you. Our hope with this podcast is that it would help you become all that God desires you to be. To find out more, visit becomingsomething.com.